Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to everyone in this sales workshop. Today we're talking about getting our share of government funding, and that is very important because it's out there and we can't let it go past us. To guide us along that path, we've got Brenden Cavanagh. Brenden and I have known each other for about 10 years. We met on the Alpha project, Alpha course. What do they call it? Alpha training. Anyway,
Yes.
Churches, and then we got to know each other a little bit in commercial radio. Brenden has been at East Coast Radio for about 17 years. And is the inspiration behind the success of their sales team there. So it's good to have everyone on board, those that have been with us before and those that haven't. Welcome. I think it's first time for Radio Veritas and possibly some CCFM people as well. Good. Over to you, Brenden. Thank you so much. And after Brendan's talked a bit, then there'll be an opportunity to put questions in. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I see some regular faces from the last few weeks of training that we've done already. So good to see everyone, and welcome to everyone that's new. Dave is 100% correct. My name is Brenden. I'm working at East Coast Radio for quite some time now, and really love radio. It's interesting. I didn't work in much media before starting at East Coast Radio, and just found my sweet spot here and just love it. Love the environment, love radio, love the collaboration that happens, and love the family of radio as well, which is great. So, like Dave mentioned, I've been at East Coast Radio for about 17 years. For the last 9 years, I've been in management and managing a few projects here for the East Coast Radio guys. And we work quite closely as a team. A lot of the insights that I'm going to be sharing with you today are based on my experience having some interaction. I used to lead the public sector or the government department. They were under my guidance for many years, but we've separated them out now, and they're a department on their own and led by a very, very, very amazing lady by the name of Corsi Duma. And so her and I've chatted and compared notes, and so I've got some insights from my experience in government and some insights from hers. So we're hoping to make it quite a practical and a sharing an opportunity. And there, like I say, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions later. So I thought this was quite funny because you always have people in a Zoom meeting that have their cameras on, which is great, and I can see interaction. And then there's always those who have their cameras off. And so whether you're dressed very comfortably or you have snacks, or as long as you're comfortable, that's what's important. My main point for mentioning the Zoom meeting is that normally I like chatting live and I like interacting with people live. But on Zoom, it's a little bit more difficult. So please can I ask you to make note of any questions and ask them at the end. I will definitely answer all questions. So the topic that we're chatting about today is getting your share of government funding. And when I talk government funding, I'm obviously talking from a revenue perspective, from an advertising revenue perspective. I think each of the categories that we have spoken about, so we've spoken about advertising agencies, we've spoken about small business, and now we're speaking about government. It really is unique. It is something that that is quite a different process from any of the other processes that we operate in. So there's a lot of understanding that needs to happen. I am going to say that the majority of what I'm going to share with you today is going to be fairly basic. And then there is some practical information, some practical tips, things that we've learned along the way. And we have a very healthy, robust relationship with our government departments that we work very, very closely with. And it's taken many years to get to that level. So a lot of it is basics. You'll know a lot of that information. I do that for the benefit of stations who probably haven't done a lot of government business. But there will be some more practical and more advanced information as we move through the presentation. And like I say, if you have any other questions or advanced questions, you're welcome to ask those as well. So the South African government as a client, so the first quote that I have included in my notes that I can see, which you can't see, is that government is mandated to deal with community radio stations because many of them are funded by government. Not all of them are, obviously, you'll know that, but some are funded by government. And government's job is to communicate to the people of South Africa. And so to do that, they have to use many media platforms. And actually, government, for the most part, have got a soft spot for community radio. But there's a disconnect between some of the radio stations, and you'll see later, I've got a statistic on the number of radio stations and then the number that are registered on the government website. So there is a disconnect. So hopefully today will help you in the process of reconnecting your station with government. If you have them as a client already, you'll know a lot of this information and hopefully you can build on it. But it's not an easy process. It really is difficult to get into a regular routine of getting advertising revenue from a government department, but it can be very profitable. It can be worthwhile. So we'll go into that a little bit more. So based on what I have access to, there are 41 national departments. It's just a sample of them up on the screen there. On top of that, there are 9 provinces, and obviously each of those with provincial departments and offices. And then within South Africa, there are 278 municipalities, and those all fall under government. So each of those municipalities would have potentially a mayor and a government or governmental structure underneath that. So from a target market point of view, there's a large amount of government departments that you can speak to try and secure revenue from. Then we layer on top of that there are, to my knowledge, 26 state-owned enterprises. There's just a sample of some of them on the screen. And most of those are 100% or at least a part percentage owned by government. So we call them parastatals or state-owned enterprises. And then what's not included in there, which is the national and provincial tourism departments. So obviously those are departments that sit under the national structures, and then there's regional structures as well. So all of those qualify as government clients. And if we tally up their total budget for the 2020 and 2021 fiscal, the grand total is 1.95 trillion rand. So that is 1,950 billion rand. So 1.95 trillion. It's a massive amount. You think of that kind of revenue that's moving around it. Obviously, that is for healthcare and it's for education, and they apportion the budget accordingly. You can go onto the website and you can see how they apportion it. What they don't give too much detail in is how much they apportion to marketing, but it is a substantial amount of money. So even if we use COVID as a reference, whenever President Ramaphosa addressed the nation, from the early stages, there was a conversation around communicating to the masses and communicating to the people of South Africa. So obviously they've started out by using TV as their main platform, and then they use digital. So in the way that they broadcast the president's speech and have press conferences, etc., and the multiple media outlets will then transmit that information or share it on their websites or social media. But the portion of budget for marketing is then to take that message and communicate it even further to the people of South Africa. And it's not just COVID, but it is each of the departments in their specific areas. Seasonality plays a big part of it. But the short answer is that there is a lot of communication money changing hands. And so for community radio, because of the community that we serve, there is an opportunity to secure some of that funding. So we're going to go into that a little bit more in detail. So what I want you to know, if you haven't dealt with government or not so much before, is that it's not a get-rich-quick scheme. I mean, I put the massive 1.95 trillion budget up there just as a reference point that there is money changing hands. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not going to be 1 or 2 departments that you sign up and that's going to be your budget made for the year. It really is a lot of hard work, and it's a long process. It takes a lot of time. And that is my actual first point, is that time is a common sort of, it's a recurring theme with government. It takes a long time to get to know the people that you need to get to know. It takes a long time to get to all of the departments and the parastatals and the municipalities. It takes a long time. It takes a long time to build relationship and earn trust, which is essential with working with government, is you have to build trust in their eyes. It takes a long time to register. So with regards to government, you have to have a vendor application with every single government that you deal with. So that's another long process that you need to go through. The other thing is obviously paperwork that relates to that vendor process. And then the last thing with time is payment. Unfortunately, as much as there's a lot of preparation that happens before the time and an order form and a vendor process, often government does take a long time to process the payment. We have what we call our age analysis at East Coast Radio. So it is literally all of the clients that owe East Coast Radio money. And then we have a separate section for government who operate under a completely different set of rules. And we allow a lot of grace because we know it takes a long time, but ultimately they do come through for the most part. So time is one of the biggest challenges. So the next thing is paperwork and processes. It can be fairly frustrating. So if you're not gifted in the admin area, you might want to find someone to assist you that is, because there is a lot of paperwork. The vendor application process requests a lot of information, and they're very detailed. So if, for example, you make a quote for a specific amount of money, the order has to match that money, and then the final invoice has to match that money as well. If it's out by a little bit, it gets canned. So you have to have an eye for detail when it comes to interacting with government departments. The other thing is that there's a supply chain department within the government that maintains all standards and processes for business that you do with government across the board. So you also need to register with the supply chain department. It just helps facilitate and, let's say, tick boxes of the processes that you need to get advertising from them on a regular basis. So, and then, like I mentioned, a vendor process for each department. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. I did a little bit of research because it's actually difficult to tell how many community stations there are in South Africa. From the research that I've done, I figured out, and I hope this is accurate, I did a lot of research into this, that there are approximately 200 community stations in South Africa. But according to the government website, there are only 62 stations, community stations, that are listed on the government website. So in my mind, that's a disconnect, because if you look at the map that's ahead of you, community stations cover the most populous areas of South Africa. And because we have very loyal listenerships in community stations, there are population out there that need to be reached with the message of government. And if government is not advertising on your station and you look after a unique audience, then that's where the disconnect is happening. And that's where throughout this process, hopefully we're going to create some connections and allow you to follow that process to get your community station, number one, listed on the government website so that they are aware of you. And number two, listed as a vendor with as many departments as possible so that you can secure some spending to come your way. So you must remember that their objective as government is to transmit information to the population. So we have, depending on the numbers that you look at, approximately 60 million or just under 60 million people in the beautiful country of South Africa. So government's job is to communicate to as many people as possible using whatever mediums. And because radio has such a high penetration into South Africa, it's the highest penetration. Most people listen to radio at some stage in their day or their week. So we have that in our favor. So we have the fact that government is mandated to use community station. We have the fact that we have a unique listenership that listens to us. And now we just need to make sure that they're using us to communicate. They also do look at various things like mass and niche communication. The preference is to go mass. So TV is an easy way to do that, and national stations are an easy way to do that. But if you convince them that you have an audience that is unique to either your geographical area or to a particular culture or a particular background that is not reached by many other media, then you have a greater chance of securing some advertising revenue from them. And so that's where you've got to carve out your space, and you've got to make sure that your brand and your station is unique and it stands out. From there, you need to get an understanding of who your listeners are, what is their age, what are their demographics, what are their psychographics, what languages do they speak, what is the culture, what geography, what broadcast area do you cover, and is there an overlap with other media or other people that share an audience with you, or is your audience fairly unique? And once you build an understanding of your listenership, and we're going to chat a little bit about that later on with regards to surveys, then you can wave the flag of your radio station with passion and saying, this is the community that we represent. And if you're not advertising on our station, you're missing out on these potential citizens that you need to reach with the message. All right. The first, so the next quote that I'll have from our head of public sector is that you need to be well informed about media and their offerings. So I've interacted with enough communication officials and head of communication for government departments to realize that they love to think of themselves as experts, but once you build trust with them, they love to hear from experts, so that it builds their personal knowledge and understanding of media and the offering of communication options in South Africa. So have a good understanding of your competition, have a good understanding of other media, printed media, other radio stations. Just try and be as close to a media expert as possible. Don't just know your brand and your station. You've got to have an understanding of others, because once you build trust with someone at a government department, they will ask you questions. They will ask you your opinion on other radio stations, etc. And if you're able to give you an accurate opinion, it's going to establish your credibility to them. So that's something that you really need to do in your spare time, is build up your expertise in the media world. So then the next point to note is, and it's a very big point, is respect. Respect is a really, really important factor when considering dealing with government departments. The quote from my colleague says, give respect to everyone you meet or get introduced to, because they could actually be your gatekeeper or the next decision maker. You don't know. So what comes into that is really communication. We are in the communication game. So our communication with the people that we meet throughout the various government departments needs to be one of respect and understanding. The other point that Corsi, who is my colleague in public sector, mentioned, she said, address each official correctly. So in a correct title or a salutation or respect, this is extremely important to them, and they take offense if you make a mistake. So if there is something culturally or something from a respect perspective, or maybe you take a very conversational, casual approach without building trust and respect with the main contact that you have, there's an opportunity that they would take offense at a perceived lack of respect. And that could actually damage any future business that you might get from a government department. So respect and culture is extremely important. The other thing is the MECs that operate within government. Obviously, for each department, they have an MEC. And you need to build up a really good understanding of who the MECs are. There's a lot of conversation that hinges around the MECs, and I think a lot of you will know that often if an interview happens or if an advert is recorded, it's very often the MEC or the Premier potentially that conducts the interview or voices the advert, etc. So it is very important to stay up to date with who the MECs are and have an understanding for who they are. If I have a conversation with Corsi about the MEC for tourism, she will know intricately who the person is, what their likes and dislikes are, whether they're very old school, whether they're new school. She'll have a very good understanding. And that information can count in your favor. You're sitting in a meeting and you're discussing a campaign or a potential campaign, and you have knowledge of their structure, of the most important people, and then definitely of the MEC. stay aware of their movements. There's some practical tips that we'll chat about later about having to be agile and having to be mobile when it comes to coming up with solutions. But you really do need to have an understanding and show respect at all times. And really building trust and relationship takes a long time. So it's about persistence. Right. So the next thing that is very important, and it comes down to respect, is how you dress. Now, this I have learned through dealing with various government departments, that dress code is very important. And it's actually a sales principle. I've been in sales for 27 years now, I think. And it's always been a sales training that you dress for the person you're about to meet. In fact, you dress, in my mind, one step up from the person you're about to meet. So if you're going to see an entrepreneur and he is in shorts and a t-shirt, you would dress one up from that. You wouldn't necessarily show up in shorts and a t-shirt, hopefully. You would maybe show up in jeans and a formal shirt. But if you're going to see government where, for the most part, they are dressed quite smartly. The men often are wearing suits, or at very least a smart trouser pants, a formal shirt, and a jacket or a blazer. Dress code is very, very important, especially if you want to be taken seriously and if you're representing your brand well. In dealing with government departments, for the most part, and I've been to many, many department meetings, the government officials are always dressed exceptionally well. And so if we want to represent our brands, we need to, as best as possible, to dress well so that they take us seriously. So that's a sales principle, but amplified when it comes to government. Okay, so we've got some basic principles out of the way, and now we need to understand from a practical point of view, where do we start? So we want to get some revenue. Where do we actually start with this? And so the first thing we need to do is go through the process of trying to build a relationship of all of the departments that would be best suited to advertise on our station. So there's a lot of doors that we have to knock on. And that is the advice that we start off. Once you've done your prep work and you are well dressed, you've got some marketing collateral, you understand media, you understand your listenership, and you're ready to go. Now it really is about knocking on doors. And getting appointments with government officials can be really difficult. Sometimes it helps you to pre-book and to show respect for their time and try and set aside an appointment. Sometimes you'll be kept waiting for hours, potentially, to see the client that you want to see. When you get to a level where you've built some of a relationship, you might do a pop-in. So if you're up in Maritzburg, you might see a series of departments in a day. But if you want to build your relationship, you're not going to do that on email. And unfortunately, you're not going to do that on phone call either. It really is face-to-face. You have to knock on a lot of doors and speak to a lot of people to try and start building that relationship. And as I said, it is part of a process. So the next thing that you want to do is get as much face time as possible with the various people. So this is a section on the government website that speaks to their events. Not all of their events and special occasions are listed here, but it's a good place to start. And the reason I put this up here is you want to start having a presence, obviously not at closed events unless you get invited, but there are a lot of public events that happen. So there might be a ribbon cutting ceremony, there might be a launch of a particular area, there might be a speech that is happening, there might be a press setup. But at the end of the day, what we've learned in our time is, so if I can give a bit of history, that East Coast Radio is perceived to have a very particular type of market, and it's not necessarily the type of market maybe that government wants to reach with certain messaging. And so there was a lot of perceptions about our station. And because we weren't, and I'll use the phrase, putting our money where our mouth was, because we weren't as a station appearing at a lot of government events, but we were asking them for advertising revenue, that's where our disconnect was. So what we learned is that we need to show that we genuinely do care about what government is doing. And how we do that is with our time and with our presence. So we started attending a lot of government events. So if the Indaba was on, we would have a presence there. If there was a function or a ceremony or a swearing in, or like I say, a ribbon cutting, we were there. We would either send a salesperson from our government department, we would send a journalist, we would send someone from marketing, but we started having a lot more of a presence. And can I tell you, it was noticed. As we get and secure a meeting after this, as we're building relationship, government officials saying, I see you had a stand at the Endeavour. I see at the small business fair, you did some work, you sent a presenter. I see, and they do pay attention. Again, I go back to my original point, it's a process and it takes a long time, but these are all things that you need to do. You can check the government website, you can check the newspaper. When you're at government departments, you can ask them over the next 3 months, what are some key events that you're going to be attending? When is the MEC going to be in town, etc. And so once you build up your diary with that on a fairly regular basis, and you'll have to share the work out so that different people at the station get an opportunity to do that. Otherwise, one person will be gone almost permanently. You need to have FaceTime at all of these events, and it is noticed. And there needs to be consistency, and you need to be genuinely interested at what is happening at the events. Okay, so we're there. This is fairly simple, but it's actually fairly complicated in who to deal with. Once you are knocking on doors and you're trying to build relationship, there's multiple positions, and you'll see that throughout the municipalities and throughout the various departments. There's lots of titles that you'll come up with. And interestingly, at all levels, the people that you speak to feel that or show up as if they are the boss. So that's quite a common denominator, is even if you're speaking to a junior media planner or a junior communication officer, they're going to speak as if they are the head of communications. So, but you need to show everyone respect. So there's lots of different titles, which you can see on the screen. I've highlighted the one at the bottom, which is, I believe, and we believe the most important, which is the head of communications. Ultimately, your goal has got to be to build relationship with the head of communications. They have many gatekeepers, and so many of the positions that are below that are filters. So the head of communications doesn't always see everyone. So it's difficult to get to that person, but you can only ask. And if you're knocking on doors and building a relationship, you can say, can I make an appointment to see the head of communications? Can I drop off this pack of information for the head of communications? I won't take up their time, but I just want to drop this pack off, give them my business card, shake their hand, and introduce myself. Again, it's going to take persistence and it's going to take consistency. And the other thing you have to be cautious of is not to get stuck. Remember, everyone thinks that they are the boss. So not to get stuck in your process of influence or influencers and decision makers, not to get stuck with someone who can't actually make a decision, but also doesn't influence the decision-making process. It is very important, sales principle as well, to build relationship with everyone from the receptionist all the way through. That's a common sales principle. We're going to build relationships with everyone that is at the company that could potentially work with us. But ultimately, you also don't want to be stuck at potentially like a communications coordinator or a junior media planner who has very little influence. And you giving them lots of time and attention and paying them a lot. They might be dropping off little things for them, and possibly none of your information is getting through to the head of communications. So your mission is to get in front of them, however long that might take. But it, again, will take some persistence. All right, we're going to move into some practical tips. And all of the next 3 slides are practical tips from our head of public sector. And some of them are very straightforward and simple, but again, we wanted to start with some basics and then move to slightly more advanced. Okay, so most of you will know, if you deal with government, that all quotes submitted to government need to include VAT. I don't know about your stations, but our station traditionally, whenever we're quoting on advertising, we quote excluding VAT. It's a standard, it's how we've always done it. But when it comes to government, it has to include VAT. We have made 1 or 2 mistakes along the couple of years where the quotation has slipped through and it's been an excluding VAT figure. The order has come through for the excluding VAT figure as including VAT, and we've had to honor that. So we've taken a knock in the actual revenue. So it is something that you have to pay attention to on a regular basis. Government departments don't pay upfront for their campaigns. I think you all know that. They issue official orders. If you don't have an order, it's not going to happen. It is as simple as that. You will not get payment any other way. You have to have an official order, and the order number has to be tagged onto your booking. So if you're printing a proof of booking or an order confirmation or flighting times and dates, your order confirmation has to, the order number from government has to be on all printed material so that it aligns. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the amounts have to be exactly the same as what's on the order, because that is what will get paid. So it needs an eye for detail. So Corsi has mentioned that government will always pay between 30 and 60 days. I think that's very generous. I think it's more like 30 to 120, sometimes 180 days. But for the most part, if your paperwork is in order, you will secure payment. And again, the time and persistence you will need to apply just to make sure that those billings come through. Another practical tip, please be open to change. Government operates very differently and their rules and regulations will never change. So one needs to be agile enough to come up with solutions to suit the client. So this is, it's exceptionally real in our world, where the structure of government and how they operate, like she says, does not change at all. But their requests and their sometimes demands might come at something that's almost counterintuitive or different from what you would normally do on a radio station. But that's the balance. As long as it doesn't make you go too far from what you can do, what your program manager is happy to do, your head of finance is happy to do, the balance is that revenue will come in from that. Obviously, from our perspective, we need to maintain absolute ethics. Unfortunately, there is from time to time one or two people in different areas, and I think this is in public sector as well as corporate as well as small business, who might want favors or special treatments or that sort of thing. Obviously, that's not what we're talking about. We are 100% ethical in our dealings with everyone, but there might be requests, like I say, payment delays or interviews, which come up fairly often, and those sort of things. And it's about how flexible you are willing to be. And there's another point coming up later, which I'll touch on. So be available at all times when your services are needed. Otherwise, they move on to the next best radio station. So here's where it's going to take commitment for whoever is dealing with public sector, is that they do not work according to 8 to 5 working hours. Unfortunately, MECs are sometimes available at early hours of the morning or after hours or weekends. Their timetables change at the drop of a hat. So you need to make a commitment that you are available. We've had situations where we'll get contacted, we've built relationship, we get contacted by a government department late on a Friday night for something that is happening on a Saturday morning. And we literally have to, as good South Africans do, make a plan. If you need to drive in and change things on the logs or speak to the DJs to include this, or phone someone in the evening and send them out early hours of the morning to go and record something, whatever it's going to take, an above average commitment to make sure that this happens. You could have a recording session for an MEC set up and something traumatic happens, and next thing he is driving off to some rural area. We've had situations where we found a 4x4, we've picked up a flash mic, and we've driven 3 or 4 hours to a remote area just to sit with the MEC for 5 minutes and record a 30-second or 45-second recording and then drive all the way back. And it's not because that campaign might have been worth a lot of money, it's because it makes a difference to that department and that MEC, and it does help with us getting revenue in. But it buys favor, and they see that you genuinely care if you go out of your way. It takes a lot of commitment and consistency, but it's worth your while. So then, the previous point I mentioned, they move on to another radio station. You can have built up phenomenal loyalty and a great relationship. And if they need to execute on an interview for the MEC the following day and they can't reach you, they'll move on to someone else. They have to fulfill their mandate, which is communicate to the people. And if you're not available or you don't return a call or you can't make a plan, they will literally move on to someone else who can. So it can be as ruthless as that, even if you have a great relationship. So it's about consistency. So the next thing is quick turnaround times. We try as much as possible to respond as soon as possible. Our copywriter, our production department from recording and advert, and our finance department are all on special notice when it comes to government. in that an order could come through for advertising that's meant to start within an hour or two. And we've had that happen. And within that short period of time, we've fast-tracked an invoice, a booking, a script, a recording, got it to the client, got it approved, and got it on air, which is definitely not our normal process. Our normal process can take a week, sometimes longer. But again, these are the plans that you have to make if you want to accommodate government bookings. So I mentioned this earlier, I alluded to it, become a problem solver. So we've had a situation where the MEC is the one who has to record, and like I say, is not available or traveling. And so we've had a portable microphone set up and sent out to all places. We've done interviews, we've done advert recordings. What we've done as well quite effectively is collaborating with other radio stations. So we have built a good relationship with Kagazi FM, which is a sister station, Ukhozi FM, Vuma FM, which are all in our neighborhood, and where one of them has recorded an ad and shares it with us, or we record an English version of an ad and they need it and we share it with them. So there's been a lot of collaboration that's happened between the radio stations because you have to be quite agile. And we've found that as we show up to a meeting, if Department of Transport is having media meetings that day, just before the meeting, we'll see the Gagazi guys sitting there, and after the meeting, we'll see the Ukhozi guys coming in or whoever. So we've actually built a good relationship. Radio is too small a community, I think, to have too much of a competitive nature. So when it comes to non-conflicting community stations that are in your area, you might want to build up a bit of a collaboration and then represent a unified front to the government department to make it easier. So the other thing is, and I mentioned persistence, have patience because you'll be turned down 1,000,000 times. I hope it's not 1,000,000 times, but that's a quote from Corsi, before they agree to do business with you. Really do need to be persistent. And in your persistence, you will buy credibility. Because if you try week after week, month after month, and they see that commitment, they see that as care and respect and credibility. So then they will ultimately spend advertising with you. Okay, last few slides and then we'll fire some questions. So I've put this image up here because ribbon cutting and launches are exceptionally important to government. There's a lot of planning and people involved when it comes to the launch of a particular structure, development. I know just in going through my preparation last night, I saw that the ANC took a lot of flack because there was actually a ribbon cutting ceremony for a toilet that was opened. And that might seem funny to us. And so they were taken to task on social media about that. But it really is, and I've tried to look behind the reason for it. It really is a celebration. They see development and growth and infrastructure. So when I say they, government, and we should see it as well as a celebration. And so whether it is a bridge, a building, a school, a toilet, water that runs to an area, or electricity that's sent to an area for the first time, it is a celebration, and we should be happy and we should want to celebrate with them. And it's newsworthy because anytime that our country improves, that is something that you want to talk about. And we have listeners on our station that should be hearing the positivity in the nation, not just the negativity. And so it's our role to do that. And so our biggest criticism from government to us many years ago was that we never see you at our events. We invite you to launches and ribbon cuttings and you never come. And so if you don't support us, we're not going to support you. And so we took a long, hard look internally, what our DJs talk about on air, because there's a potential to be anti-government. So we had to take a very balanced approach in being a positive influence in the nation. And so we changed that. And so we started providing news coverage of, if it was newsworthy, obviously, of any government events or occasions. We made sure we had a brand presence, either with branding or people or both, at their important occasions. So if they opened a bridge, that might not be something that we would make a big fuss about or do an article about, but we would send a journalist out, they would cover the news story, and they would make it human interest. And they say, on this freeway, in the last 5 years, 17 lives have been lost from people crossing this road. And now we have a bridge. So it's going to save lives, and this is a great celebration. So it might be a mention in a news article or coverage or whatever, but it's meaningful and it shows government that we care. So we try and make ourselves available to any and all government events. Like I say, you might have to share the load a little bit. The next thing that we've done, which is very small but very practical and has worked exceptionally well for us, is we've built our little black book of contacts. So our news department has a list of contacts in all areas, but from a government perspective, we spent a lot of time and attention making sure that we have the right spokespeople from the right departments and municipalities, etc. And we have regular communication with them, whether they have news or whether they don't. And it's two-way communication. They will give us news which they would like us to cover. We'll contact them for anything upcoming in their calendar. And yeah, if there's anything relevant, we'll obviously try and include that wherever possible. And then if we can, obviously budget depending, we also have a news contacts function. So it might not be a big elaborate dinner, but we might have them over to the radio station, all of the contacts on our list, and we might just do some very light snacks, and our head of the organization will address our government contacts and just thank them for the work that they're doing and for the information that they provide us that helps us be a better station and communicate to the people of KZN, which is obviously our broadcast area. And so having that contact list and maintaining good relationships with those contacts is another way to build really good relationship. Right, so you'll know this already, that government loves interviews, and most program managers do not love long government interviews. So we are not a talk radio station at all, and our program manager, and I'll use the word hate because he really does hate interviews in general, unless they are entertainment and lifestyle. He doesn't want to hear about it. So the budget speech and COVID relief efforts and that sort of thing, we really have to manage the content to make it palatable and interesting to our listeners. And that's where we've had to work quite closely with government officials, is obviously to take the story that they are trying to tell and tell it in such a way that it will be well received. And that's the marrying. And you know what, that's advertising. The client owner, he knows his business, he knows his product. We know our listeners, and it's about how do we marry those two for the best possible campaign. So it's exactly the same for government. So when it comes to interviews, I don't know what your station's policy is on interviews, but we try our best to pre-record interviews if possible, which allows us to edit and stick to specific times. We flight the interview as if it's live, but we pre-record it to maintain a little bit of control. If that's possible, please can you do that? I think it maintains like a quality and a time control. If we have to do a live interview, we specify particular time slots or particular shows where maybe there's a bit more of an appetite for live interaction. If the government official is comfortable taking phone calls, we can do some interaction with phone calls, etc., but only at specific time slots, and we try and manage that. If potentially it's going to be a long interview, what we would do is we would record that interview, we would flight a portion of it, so maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then the full form interview we'll have on our website. There'll be an article written. So how we sell it to the government department is that we allocating the most important parts that are going to cover the most important information. But if people are interested in the full story, we write a long article with all of the detail. We put the full podcast recording on the website to make them feel better. They say we're going to include a picture of you so that they can build a recognition for you as our representative in government. We might include a bit of a profile piece on who the person is, if it's an MEC, a little bit of their history and their experience, etc. So we make it a bit of a puff piece on the person who's being interviewed, and then the majority of the audio sits in that pre-recorded article, and that's obviously shareable. They can share that on their social media if they're active. Generally, they're not. Most departments are not, but there are some that are, but they can put on their websites or their social media, etc. But interviews are a big part. Like majority of what happens with government is that they want to share information that they feel can't be contained in a 30, 45 or 60 second advert. So they want to do interviews. So you just have to manage that process. It's a bit of a fine line. You have to do a bit of a dance, but I think in government you'll be used to that. And then, like I said, we amplify that on our website, and then we would also take highlights and we would flight that on air, sort of a snippet from the interview that's really interesting, to pre-promote the podcast on the website. And we might do the same thing on social media, just to add a bit of, so the budget speech, for example, we might get someone in who unpacks the highlights of the budget speech as it affects our listeners, and then we'll put a lot more detail on the website and in the podcast. So that's just a small practical thing that we do. And then this one here is, I actually cannot emphasize this enough. It takes a lot of time and planning. So this is a roadshow. This is a sample of a roadshow that we've done at an event, at a government event. But more than that is we try and go to the actual government departments once a year. If you can do twice a year, that's great, but it takes a lot of planning, a lot of timing. And a roadshow for us, the recipe for a successful roadshow is, and again, everything is budget dependent, but we will try and see every single government department. That's what takes time. It takes 3 weeks of morning till afternoon, multiple sessions throughout the day, planning for these on this area, these on this area, etc. It's about taking a presenter or presenters from the station who you think would get on well with that particular department, and potentially they've done some appearances and live crossings and that sort of thing for them in the past. So they've got to build relationship with them. We would take some snacks with government clients, or like every other client, they love snacks, they love free stuff, they love prizes. So we would do maybe a little quiz and a competition. We'd give them, if we've got pens or lanyards or notebooks or any small sort of marketing collateral that can leave a lasting impact of our brand. And most importantly, whoever we take, so we take a team. So it's a presenter, it's our head of public sector, it's 1 or 2 of the salespeople within the public sector department at East Coast Radio. It is the coordinator from our side who's also in public sector, and we might take our customer relations person. And so that whole team with vibrancy and energy will come and make an impact at the department. And then we literally go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and leave a visible impact. We might leave some information, we might leave some packages, but it's really about relationship building. And as much as it's a lot of work, I cannot tell you how much this unlocks revenue. Literally in the week or 2 weeks after that, we get inundated with phone calls. I've got a campaign coming up. We've got a launch happening. We've got this month that's happening. We need to do something. It has a direct impact on business. The only other thing I haven't included in here is something that we've started doing for the decision makers, which we call, it started out as a whiskey evening. We found that the decision makers and the head of communications in a lot of the departments enjoyed their whiskey. So we would have a whiskey tasting evening where we partner with a whiskey brand, and they would come with some of their samples and we would provide some snacks, and there would be a whiskey tasting that happens. That also, again, is very budget dependent. You might have to lean on some partners and do your own version of what that might be. It might not be whiskey, it might be something else. But an event of that sort has a direct knock-on impact on business that comes in. Again, if you've built a relationship already, you invite them to an event like that, have an opportunity for them to network with their peers, and then literally in the next week or 2, we get phone calls and emails with new orders. So that is what we have used to lead to our success. So we have been very, very successful in the public sector. I think probably for the last 5 years consecutively, they have met and achieved their budget within East Coast Radio. Obviously our target, and the targets are exceptionally high. So they've done very, very, very well. So I hope that information has been helpful and practical. And we're on to our favorite time, which is the questions section. And so we're going to open it up first of all to anyone who's brave enough to switch on their camera and their mic and to ask a question. And then I'll be checking the chat, so if there's any questions there as well. But thank you so much to everyone for paying attention and listening in.
Hi, Brenden. It's Noah here from Good News.
Hello, Neo.
Thank you. It's been a great session. So, I had three questions before, and one was where to start. I mean, I noticed that ECR, we just broke up at a press briefing in between the questions and be like, oh, we hear everything you want. And I thought, isn't this supposed to happen at the office? But now I understand that that was your approach to show face and as well present your offering every time, especially to
Yeah,
new MECs when they're coming in, etc. As if it's some intro.
correct.
The question I have now is that I've seen that lots of community radio stations and government relationships are synchronized. In other words, they want you to collaborate, as you say. And
Yes.
we also have people like the ACM and the NCRF that sort of bid on our behalf, and then we get that client.
Mm,
So I always wanted to, and then you get the sense that after, because I'll make an example about the client we had, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
mm,
We haven't had them since there was an attempt to have a sort of a collective going to the department for all community stations. Meanwhile, we are situated in a rural area, and they would be a great client for us. So I wanted
yeah.
to know how to deal with that, not trying to go behind the forum's relationship with you and the client, but at the same time for programs that we have previously and we don't have anymore, which we
Mm.
fitted perfectly because we had that niche client listenership for them. How do we work that one out in our proposals? Because I get the sense or the feeling that they are now also tuned to think it will only work if we're a collective and not if they deal with one station. So when you talk to them, and it's they're no more in that feel of yes, sure, you are a rural station, and we could be a great client for you. They're thinking about other stations as well. So how do you navigate those relationships with colleagues, the collective, and as well as the client whom you can see you've got a selling point for?
Yeah. So it's a very good question. So if I can relate it in a small way or reference it to advertising agencies and clients. So let's say there's a client that is represented by an advertising agency. In a perfect world, you would have a great relationship with the advertising agency and a great relationship with the client, and that would be first prize. So if I can use your example in saying that there are forums that are representing all of the stations or at least a selection of the stations, but there's also your direct relationship with the department. Because what I find, it's a difficult one when you have a forum, because they're doing the right thing and they're saying, we represent this selection of people. And often when you go to a forum, it's a gathering of numbers, smaller numbers, to make one big collective number so that it represents strength. But in that collection, there's also not as much flavor, if I can call it that, or diversity. It more becomes, the focus becomes about we're representing these 2 million people as a collective, instead of we are representing, and I'm going to use the word tribes, but I mean it in a marketing sense, is that this is the traditional tribe. This is the Christian tribe, the Christian youth tribe, the Christian elderly gospel tribe. There's multiple tribes within our country. And so we are 60 million people, but we are also made up of individuals. So my advice would be that work needs to be done. So from your question as Good News Community Radio and everyone that's listening, is work needs to be done as the radio station to make sure their flavor is represented in the forum, and the forum needs to represent the individual flavors, not just the number, so that you're representing diversity within that number. And then with maybe not permission is the wrong word, but with acknowledgement from the forum that there's also a place to build relationship directly with the government department. The balancing act with that is there needs to be trust and transparency, because if the radio station is building relationship directly and saying, hey, we're a fantastic rural station, we meet your objectives, etc., etc., it's not to the detriment of the forum. It's to add weight to what they're saying and adding some flavor. So that, because it really needs to be that unified front. I agree with the unity, I agree with forums, but as long as the forum is communicating the flavor, and sometimes the forum would be the one that is saying, this station here or these stations here represent rural areas. So, and this is where it's a dynamic thing. It's not a once-off presentation, it is a regular. So the forum needs to represent regular communication, dynamic communication, and taking some insight from Good News and other stations that are in rural, saying, hey, you guys are in, or we are in rural, Department of Agriculture, this would be perfect for them. Can you approach them with this? We're going to share some information from our side, but we're saying the same message. I hope that makes sense. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions?
Brenden?
There we go.
That's Phakamani from Radio Kwezi.
Hello, Phakamani. How are you?
I'm well, thanks, Brenden. Thank you for such an informative session. Thank you so much. And quite a few things that you've mentioned, it's things that one has experienced through working with government departments and specifically municipalities. Now, Brenden, I just want to check something with you here. Sure. You know, we're working with about 5 municipalities. Some are districts and some are local municipalities from the area where we are. Yes. And mostly we broadcast for rural-based audiences. Now, the question is, you know, as a station, we've just bought an outside broadcasting unit. It's something that we never had before. But awesome. Now there's a plan. We would like to pilot some project where we come as a media partner. You know, these municipalities, they've got IDPs programs. Yes. So where you come and partner with them, maybe because what we've been doing, working with them, is that they will only buy like 1 month slot where the mayor will come to the studio and present whatever project he's busy with, something like that. But yes. Now, the idea was to present a package from now on that will include the media. I mean, us coming as a media partner for their IDP programs. Do you see a possibility of such a kind of a relationship, or, I mean, coming up with a package that will include that? Secondly, you know, some of them you find that we've been able to establish some kind of a long-term contract where the mayor can come to the studio for like 12 months, as I mentioned, 1 slot per month. But awesome. Looking at others, we failed to reach such an agreement. So the municipality will only come just once, maybe in 3 months, and then you have to make a follow-up and follow them as well again, and then they will come again. So what we've seen is that my experience is that you can't put one plan for everybody. It just depends who you are dealing with. Yes. But maybe some tips on such kind of relationships that one wants to establish, especially what we would like to propose to them going forward.
Yeah. So first of all, I echo our colleagues from Good News Community Radio Station. They say congratulations on the broadcast unit. That's very exciting. So we definitely use outside broadcast to our benefit. At the end of the day, it starts out with a conversation. So if you've already got the mayor coming through for a regular session, you can use that as a reference point to anyone else that you're trying to speak to and offer them a similar arrangement. So use that as a reference and say, if you can get a quote from the mayor saying it works exceptionally well at communicating his or her objectives over the course of the year, etc. And then you can use that as a reference point to speak to the other departments or other contacts that you have in government. But to come back to your original point, and I think the biggest thing is media partnership. For us, it's a phenomenal tool on multiple levels to be able to meet revenue and listenership objectives as well as client objectives. Because if you're going there with a broadcast unit, and hopefully some branding as well, you are ticking a brand building execution for yourself. So you getting your brand in amongst many people that could then potentially become listeners or could influence. So it's meeting your own objectives. So I've always seen an outside broadcast as very much a marketing for the station themselves as a first prize. The second thing is exactly what I said earlier, is it's a presence. So it shows for the government department or for the municipality, whoever it is that's having the function, it shows support from the radio station. And generally they love having radio stations, plural, as many as they can, depending on the area, because it adds credibility to their event. And they know it's getting, well, remember, their primary objective is the transmission of information to the population. And so if you're having a broadcast at a particular event, then it meets that need. So what we do is, for us, we like as much long-term commitment as possible. So we would share our calendar for the year. And so we'd have a meeting, we call a workshop, where the client would present their calendar for the year and we present our calendar for the year. And we see where there's a synergy. So if they have particular months, like they might have a Heritage Day, they might have Workers' Day, they might have specific things that are part of their calendar on a regular basis. Then there'll be unique things like launches, etc. So we have line of sight of their full calendar, and then we share our calendar. So it's our station anniversary, and this month we normally do a Christmas event or an Easter event or whatever, and then we try and synchronize the two calendars, and then we put a media partnership package together that covers, if possible, 12 months. And you say, okay, you're doing Workers' Day, you're doing an activation here, so we would like to broadcast from your activation and include this and that. And so when you're presenting to them, you present the full package. So you say to them, you will get one outside broadcast every single month from now until 12 months from here. You will get one interview for a representative, either yourself or someone from your department, every single month from now until 12 months. One of their objectives could be to bring awareness to their community, social investment, etc. You could add in some advertising airtime 1 week a month for the 12 months to promote their CSR, and you could build that into the package. So when you say the words package and media partnership, that makes things come alive to me, because that's what we do fairly often. And so in that media partnership package, we would put a lot of value where we're meeting their objectives. So if their objectives are these particular special events and functions, we'll make sure we have a presence. We'll make sure that we're talking about it on air, and we interview someone every single month or every single opportunity. And then our objective really is to help them, but it also is to make some money from the process. So we would work out what an outside broadcast would cost if we were to sell it to a commercial client. We would work out what an interview would be. We would work out what the airtime would be to promote whatever objectives. We would work out whatever the airtime would be that 1 week a month that we give to promote their CSR or whatever their objectives are. And that value would be X. And then we say, listen, we're going to give you X value, but we're going to give it to you at a greatly reduced price, because we are in a mutually beneficial media partnership. We are meeting your needs and you are investing in our business. So we're going to secure that over a longer period of time. So it takes a little bit of work, and I agree with you. It's the structure, the loose structure you can use as a foundation, and you can speak to the different departments or municipalities, but customize it according to their needs. Because you might get a district that is not as active and they've got maybe 3 special functions that happen throughout the year. And then you might have a regional municipality that has something on every single month, or every single second week or whatever. So in that way you customize it, but the structure is the same. You say, here are the elements. So you might include some on-air exposure, some website exposure in your events page, or if you have one of those, some social media exposure, you get an outside broadcast, you get a week of airtime, and we package that all together. So you get a substantial amount of exposure. Again, we're ticking the box. We are helping you transmit accurate information to the right people at the right time. And in exchange, you're investing in our station and helping us as a local business to survive and thrive. And so that mutually beneficial relationship you put in place over a period of time. I hope that answers your question, Phakamani.
Thanks, Brenden. There's a question here also from Jackie CCFM on the chat. Can you see that?
There we go. Okay, so it's hi, Brenden. Thank you for the informative session. I'm Jackie from Radio CCFM. We're currently registered on the government supply chain management channel as a vendor, which is great. It's a good start. My question is, are there other channels that we can register as a vendor? So it's a simple answer, but it's a complicated situation, is that you have to start with government supply chain, and that's almost your biggest first tick that you have to tick. But you still have to, for most of the other departments, register as a vendor with those departments as well. Some of them defer to the supply chain management, but a lot of them have their own vendor systems. That's been our frustration, is that we went to supply chain because we were told we're not accurately registered. And we had paperwork issues because we have a head office and we're a division of our head office, and that created problems because they want to book with East Coast Radio, not with Kagiso Media. And so anyway, that took a long time to get supply chain right. And then we went to the department, I can't remember who was the first, it might have been tourism or whoever. And we said, okay, we're ready to process. And they said, oh, but we don't have you on our system. So we can't issue your order number if you're not on our individual system as well. So the great place to start is government supply chain, but you also, for the most part, have to register as a vendor with every other department as well. So yeah, so like I said, it's a bit of a process. It's not always the case, and we find that the different departments have different rules and different regulations when it comes to vendor. But the safest thing, unfortunately, the longest thing, is to register with everyone. Hope that helps. All right, another question in the group, and I got a thank you from Phakamani. Thank you very much, Phakamani. So from Radio Veritas, they said, Brenden, have you come across any ethical issues and how did you deal with them? It's a very good question. And for the most part, and I'd say 98% of the time, the people that we deal with are quite senior in the organization, and when they've requested things from us, it's not from an unethical place, it's more from a value place in that interaction. So head of communication, so I remember I had a long, robust meeting with the head of communications for Department of Transport in the province here. And his assertion was that we as a radio station don't do enough for road safety, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we had a long discussion about his objectives and our objectives. And we are a commercial radio station, but we're very entrenched in the community. So there was a lot of discussion about what our objectives should be according to his perspective. But so he was asking for more value and more exposure and free mentions and free interviews and all of these wonderful things. But it wasn't unethical. Where we have, and I obviously won't mention any detail, but where we have had some questionable situations, and it hasn't been too often, to be completely honest, has been either further down the rankings, so someone who's a communication officer that would say things like, if we book with you, then how's that going to benefit me? So there would be more hints that are dropped that we just completely ignore, and we focus on from a professional point of view. So how would it benefit you? Well, your team would benefit from great exposure on our radio station. You would meet the objective of communication, the information to the population. And so we just answer in a straight advertising perspective. The place where we've experienced unethical advances, if I can say that, most common is people that are not in government, that are actually external. So consultants, entrepreneurs, people, business owners that claim to be very well connected, and they would say things like, I would help you facilitate a booking, and that booking would be 50,000, but you need to put in 60,000 into my account, and then I will pay them the 50,000, and that 10% is like a finder's fee. Whenever those kind of external consultants speak to us about that, they always make out the conversation as this is normal, this is what we do, it's like a commission, it's a whatever. But our approach is again to go completely professional and say that we prefer a direct relationship with the client or the department. So if you can put us in contact with them, we'll facilitate with them. But unfortunately, we don't pay, especially now that the agency commission has been removed. We use that as a reference point and say, well, we don't pay a finder's fee or an agency commission for anyone who refers. But if you book advertising with us, we'll give it to you at a great rate to thank you for the referral and that sort of thing. Generally, they don't connect you with their contacts and they move on to someone else. But yeah, that's how we've handled it. And like I say, the compliment from our side is most of that has come from people that are not in government. It's external people.
Great, Brenden. I've got a question from my experience there. Just looking at your beautiful, fancy OB van, beyond the reach of most community stations, even Vuma. I mean, we used to hire a van and put our branding on it, which is a possibility. I always maintain that you don't really need, you see, a lot of the problem is for the community stations that don't have an expensive piece of machinery like that, and it is expensive. It is. Half the price is the van, the other half is the equipment that goes in it, and then insuring it, driving it, all the rest of it. Is it possible, but perhaps you haven't had that experience, just to have branding, you have your store activations, that kind of thing, to shift that into the government realm where the station is there with branding, even with a portable studio without the expense of the van. Any comment on that?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, maybe, in that it's a really good thing, and also it's also not necessary all the time. So to back to the original point, one of the main focuses of an event is to transmit information. So you could have someone with a small portable laptop and internet connection, and you could do a broadcast from that. And we slowly but surely using internet connection or the 4G network, which will move to 5G network, and have been able to do fully fledged broadcasts with no van and sometimes no other equipment and just one person, the presenter. So we're moving into that space now. But to go back to the government department, their feeling is to have a presence. And if you park, which we have, we're very fortunate to have a bright yellow, massive, big OB van. You park that there, that's a really big presence, and they love that presence. So part of it is the practical or the communication of information, and the other part is the presence. And so our brand is quite strong, and so we put up the yellow banners, and we've got the bright yellow van, and it makes a big impact. And so the colleague from Good News mentioned that they've seen us at various events, and it's an attention seeking, and it's really more from the government officials to say, we're here to support you. So we're going to make a bit of a noise, but budget is very real. So some practical considerations in that, commercial radio stations like our own, oftentimes when we upgrade equipment or that sort of thing, we will sell, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes give away equipment that we can no longer use. So I would suggest that community stations look to commercial stations, if you have in your area or around there, or even to contact them and just keep that line of communication open. It's almost like having a lot of people talk in motivation these days of having a sponsor. A sponsor is someone who's going to fly your flag when you're not there. So if as a community station, you build a close relationship with a commercial station, it doesn't have to be in your geographical area, and just say, hey, we are radio, we want to learn from you. can we send our people to spend a day in your studios, and let's gain some knowledge? 9 times out of 10, a commercial station is very open to that. We do that as often as we can. And then to have that line of communication open to say, listen, if you have got equipment that you are looking at moving on, we could really, really benefit. And sometimes you can get some equipment either extremely cheaply, or you can get it free of charge. And then coming back to outside broadcast, I think if you have the ability to put up some branding, and then you have a desk set up, that's still a presence. And if your staff are there and they're interacting with people, it still makes an impact. So obviously the OB van is something to aim towards. But my honest opinion is I think we are, as technology is growing, we're moving away from these big OB van setups, and we're moving to a laptop, a microphone, and an internet connection. And then we'll try and amplify it with branding and people. But yeah, hope that helps, Dave.
Great. Okay. Right, a comment there from Kululego.
Yes.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Any other questions? But if you have anything else you'd like to, further question, Brenden, just send your email to Natalie at ACM, and she will pass it on, and we'll try and share the information as widely as possible within the ACM. Brenden, thank you so much. It's been very valuable for all of us. Again, it's hard work and it takes time, but